Hi there, welcome to the U.S. Vegetable Laboratory Broccoli Trial 2011 Phase 1 testing. I'm Zach and this is Alex, and we'd like to walk you through the typical procedure of how we evaluate a plot. If you notice, our field on the far 6 rows were planted March 8th. That's our planting 1, and the close 6 rows were planted March 18th, 10 days later. So when we first approach a plot, what my first technique to do is to count all of the plants and then count number of marketable heads, which hopefully everyone knows how to count, so I'm not going to show you that. Next thing I do is evaluate the head extension parameter. This plot, for example, is fairly middle of the road. I generally view head extension as sort of protrusion above the plant or being buried in. In this example, this is middle of the road, so I'm going to rate this as a 3 out of 5. Next parameter is plot uniformity. In this case, the broccoli does not look very good per se, but it's relatively uniformly bad. And you'll find that although there's some variation in maturity, with these two for example, most of the plots are going to mature within about 3 days of each other. So this is an example of something I would call a 4. It's not perfect, but it is somewhat better than average. Next parameter that we look at is color. You should have a chart of color and you want to look at multiple heads. I don't know if this will do it justice, but in general, most of these heads are between 1 and 3 in color, so the best rating would be 2. The next parameter I want to look at is dome. I like to cut a few heads and look at them in profile, and you can check with the book. You'll get a good feel of it, but in general, this is somewhere between a 2 and a 3. Since we have a 1 to 5 rating, it can be difficult to choose. Like, I would like to give this a 2.5, but I think 2 is a slightly better rating, slightly more appropriate. So, next, I want to talk about head smoothness. Is that the correct name? Which
it is head uniformity and smoothness.
Head uniformity and smoothness. You'll notice there's a good deal of lumpiness here. That's not the nice round dome that we like to see. So it's going to be penalized for that. Also, there's a good deal of this bracting, which is a reaction to heat most of the time, and that too detracts from smoothness. You'll see a lot worse than this, believe it or not. So I generally give a plot similar to this, a 2. Next is firmness. Firmness in many cases will be 5. You don't generally reward a plot for having a hard head, you just kind of expect it. So I like to just physically touch the plots and notice if there's any give to the heads. In this case, there really isn't. It's a good tight head, so I'm going to call that a 5. Most of our plots have been rated 5. Next, after smoothness, is small bead. You'll notice that, where did I drop those heads? You'll notice, and you can check on the chart, that these have very small beads. I would be inclined to call this a 4 for bead size. That to me is about the best comparison. Next is bead uniformity, which is not perfect, but is very good. You don't see many irregular beads protruding from the mix too much, so I would be inclined to give this a 4 for bead uniformity. And then finally, we want to give it a rating for overall quality. This is somewhat of a synthetic parameter based on the other measurements you've taken, and to an extent a value judgment that you as the evaluator make. I would call this a 2. It's probably not marketable, even though it has some nice characteristics such as small bead and uniform bead. The color and smoothness are very problematic. You will see worse than this, like I said, but not a lot worse. And then finally, holding ability. Generally, Alex and I have been rated a plot and we wait to give it holding ability until maybe the next day or the day after that when we're in the field. And what we look for is a head that's somewhat oversized and how well it holds together in firmness. This is an example of an oversized head, and notice it still has good firmness. It's not separating very much. This is above average holding ability, so if I had to rate it now, I would call this a 4, but it's best to wait 2 days and look at your plot. Finally, we would make notes for things. It's not the case here, but sometimes you'll find hollow stems. This is not a very severe hollow stem. Sometimes the whole entire stem will be hollow, but it's good to make notes of things like that, or an excessive amount of bracting. And sometimes, I didn't notice anything here, you'll see something like this, which is called lateral growth. If this is really excessive, I will write that in the notes too. So, I hope this was informative. I hope you guys have a lot of fun doing this project. We have, and best of luck. Ciao.